there's a sense that, oh, well, you know, they're Indians and they're artifacts. They're not people, you know, and that's a moral decision that's made there.
Hey y'all, it's Greg Harmon with Deceleration.news, and that is Karla Aguilar of the American Indians of Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. We got together at Southside Lions Park last week to discuss a number of issues, particular to things that are happening right now with with AIT, and also with the Tap Pilam Coahuiltecan Nation. And more broadly, one of our favorite topics, white supremacy. So related to kind of like the sequence of this conversation, it's important for folks to know and to know how to support. Right now, there's pending in Austin at the Texas Legislature is an effort an effort to recognize the Tap Pilam peoples as a official sanctioned state recognized tribe. Which is important historically, culturally, and in the press for broader justice, but in a very specific way to the redevelopment right now with the Alamo, San Antonio de Valero, in terms of making sure that the Alamo is recognized as a cemetery, in terms of influencing the redevelopment plans there, in terms of making sure that it's not just the John Wayne story that's told, because there's a lot of interest on the Republican side of making sure that the mission of that site is only to tell the story of the battle. And we know that the story is much deeper and longer than that. Not only these, hundreds of years of Spanish colonization and the missionization of Native peoples, but even beyond that, that the lands here, Yanawana, the land of the spirit waters, and all the people who were here prior to colonization. It's a big story. It's a rich story. And AIT has been working to influence and to make sure that it's told well. But if you go to the Tap Pilam site, tappilam.org, you're going to find a way to sign at this point. A lot more documents are going to drop, Karla tells me, but you can go in here and sign on to this petition to make sure that an in-depth third-party archival and archaeological review of that site is performed without state recognition or federal recognition, like most of the original people of the land here. There's very little governmental, like official sanctioned authority, right, that they can bring. So in terms of that effort right now in Austin, San Antonio's Jose Menendez carried Senate Bill 805, and that's sitting with the Secretary of State. What's in motion now also is on the House companion bill is Leo Pacheco, and that's pending with the Committee on Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. So I'm going to flash up, a link if you're watching this on video to find them. Otherwise, search up these bills. And the broader conversation as we kind of like unwind this thing is really around a white supremacist ideology, and in particular how it manifests within the environmental movement through kind of that settler colonial mindset. And so Karla was one of those I went to. There's an ongoing dialogue outside of this space called Unlearning Circles that I've been contributing and participating in. And so this interview was intended to help inform that. But it was so great and went in a lot of unexpected directions that I wanted to make sure that we were able to preserve it and share it. So I'd like to turn this time over and turn the mic over to Karla, and may this be useful in your work dismantling white supremacy and working for justice in this time and in this space.
The truth is, it's really exciting times. It's busy. There's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of motion. And I think what's important for the public to understand about how significant this historic moment is that, this is, 40 years in the making, of tribal people in their bands and families and clans, regenerating, reconstituting when they were supposed to have been made extinct by the colonial project and missionization, and then Hispanicization, which is essentially, tribal folks having to hide behind the curtain of being Mexican in order to survive, because the Texas Rangers and the extermination campaign in Texas was totally real, and little by little these historical acknowledgments are being made, but in South Texas and San Antonio is home of the Tap Pilam Coahuiltecan Nation, and the courageous, steadfast, long road work that has been done to get us to this place needs to be acknowledged. It's not something that's like, they're creating state recognition. They're submitting legislation for state recognition so that they can have, standing in court, so that their people won't get dug up anymore at the Alamo and these other places. It's not for cosmetics. It's not for some. People say that it's for, because they want gaming rights. It couldn't be furthest from the truth. The state legislature in Austin is going to decide whether the state of Texas will amend its constitution to create a state-recognized tribes, right? Which is long overdue. There are people that have existed in Texas way before it was even Spain. And we have a duty to give those folks an opportunity to be recognized and seen and heard, and directing resources to those communities across the state so that they can take care of their people in a rightful way. So the Tap Pilam Coahuiltecan Nation would be the first to receive this state recognition, and would be a game changer for our community, but in particular looking at the scenario at the Alamo, which dates back back to the first digs that were happening that we've referenced, in the 20s and 30s, where human remains had been dug up when they were doing sewage lines and so forth, utilities, the roads that were being built, back then. There are bones and bones that have yet to be identified, that have yet to be given their place, and the state of Texas continues to bulldoze forward these processes without acknowledging the lineal descendants of these places, because according to them they don't have standing, whereas there's tons of evidence that we want them to take. We've had to go to court to be able to prove the uninterrupted presence of these families and their cultural affiliation from the earliest documented texts, which go before even, the 13 colonies existed. These families have been here and have the right to be able to determine what happens to their ancestors, right? So this historic time, people are at this time, people are invited to find out more, to volunteer, get involved, by calling legislators, by particularly looking at the state recognition opportunity that we have right now, and to hold accountable the city of San Antonio in their commitments to the city of San Antonio to tell the whole story. At least they're saying now that they can say that, okay, well, we can tell the whole story in the plaza because the state of Texas has got their own thing going on. So there's three entities, that exist at the Alamo. It's the state of Texas, and it's arm of the General Land Office, and its agency that it created, the Alamo Trust, in order to manage the Alamo, which is the actual Alamo compound, right? And then you have the city of San Antonio, which manages all of the streets and the plaza that surround the Alamo complex, and then that exists within Bexar County. And then it's a national monument, so it has the national jurisdiction that's laid on there, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. site. So National Park Service has some authority in all of these layers, right, of activity that's there.
But the struggle over the story within those agencies.
And the ones that are determining the policies of exclusion, of the weaponization of NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, is the state of Texas through the General Land Office and its agency, the Alamo Trust, that is still recalcitrant in their acknowledgement and incorporation of the lineal descendants of the families of, of the people that they're digging up, on one hand, and on the other hand, in the interpretation of the site, where there is, again, this settler colonial narrative that history at the Alamo only happened in 1836, and that myopic, convenient white supremacist lens that's rooted in white supremacy, right, ignores and erases the history of that place and all of the people that made it happen, that made us possible here in San Antonio, because we only want to tell this convenient mythological narrative. Whereas our involvement there at the Tap Pilam and other lineal descendants being able to tell the broader story of the Alamo is justice not only for our people and being able to interpret the indigenous contributions to the Alamo and Mission San Antonio de Valero and all of the other missions, but is a justice to the people, because they'll get to know the full narrative of what happened here and what made this beautiful city and state possible. See, the thing about settler colonialism is that it is so deeply wound into our spindles of life, right? The very fabric of our life, that we don't necessarily witness it. We're not conscientious of it because it's so deeply ingrained in who we are as a people, and I speak not only to those of Anglo heritage, but for all of us, whether we come from anywhere in Latin America, the Caribbean, South Asia, anywhere that has been impacted by the imperialism of the 1600s on, right? So it's really deep, and so let's begin even at the perception of time and space, which is the matter of your whole perception of the world comes from your sense of time and space. The settler colonial narrative has taught us that time is a linear thing that we stack year after year on top of one another, and that gives us more or less about a 4,000 year framework with what we've got in our current experience. Whereas indigenous thinking, native thinking, tells us and has demonstrated scientifically that time is of a cyclical nature, and our experience on planet Earth as we spin in relationship to the moon, in relationship to the sun, and in relationship to the cosmos that have been there throughout human experience, has developed calendrical systems and a theoretical mathematical understanding of time and space that is so deep and so profound that folks that have been raised in a settler colonial environment have no sense of what that looks like. Our new year in this society is that December, January, transition, but in relationship to the earth and the moon, and earth and the sun, it's absolutely arbitrary. And so people have their sense of existence marked not by an arbitrary calendar that was imposed by a Roman imperial force, the Gregorian calendar that we currently operate in, but rather one that looks at the relationships of everything in nature and how we and humanity exist within it, not outside of it. The understanding of traditional cultures has ourselves as the human experience just being essentially a grain of sand in the ocean of everything that exists on planet Earth. whereas the settler colonial experience will tell you that your embodiment is the only lens through which to look at time and space from these arbitrary measures that we exist in, and that's life, and you can have eternal hell or eternal grace and salvation on the other side, but that this is the mark of it here, right? And it's in this linear fashion, and you get a birth date and an end date, whereas in our traditions we understand ourselves as an embodiment of our ancestors and a continuation of their efforts, of their sacrifices, and the responsibilities that they carried forth. And so we, in order to be live a dignified experience, we embody the best and the boldest and the brightest of our ancestors in this lifetime, in order to be able to leave that example for our progeny 7 generations ahead. So the whole sense of time, space, and experience is vastly different even from that place. So when we talk about settler colonialism, I invite folks to consider really taking a step back and examining everything that they've been educated around academically, within our families, within our socialization processes, that have normalized that settler colonial experience that I argue dehumanizes us, because it creates a distinction, and this is a core distinction, that we as people are separate from nature, whereas anywhere in the world in land-based spiritual traditions, we understand ourselves and our human experience as responsible to her, because the earth is a living, breathing force that activates off of magnetism and gravity and fluctuations of temperature and observable scientific phenomenon, that with a harmonious, humble relationship with her, that we can manage and steward our existence here in a way that is not destructive, because at the end of the day we belong to her, instead of having a dominance over Mother Earth and seeing her as resource space, or as a resource that we can legitimately extract from.
I wanted to ask you, considering everything that you're saying, for even the environmental community can still be sick with the settler colonial mindset as an inheritance, and what is the manifestation, right, of that mindset, even within that context?
What comes to mind immediately first is, ancestors of the pioneers, right? Folks that were given the opportunity to, as immigrants from Europe, to expand into this vast, beautiful landscape and build out and make their mark. There was a sense of let's claim this land for us, right? And that pioneer mentality, particularly in Texas, is very unique, because and even zeroing in further here into South Texas, which has had 6 different flags in 304 years, is that the pioneer mentality is one of conquest and associated with nationalism, associated with a group, right? So you're a pioneering, endeavoring, entrepreneurial. We can take and build and grow and do as we please, because it's already there for us. And so this inherent sense of ownership, is something that is, it's so deeply ingrained, right? And we don't even catch ourselves in it because it's a given. So it manifests in a lot of different ways. And so the invitation is to all of us to be able to ask ourselves, where do I feel a sense of entitlement or ownership over a process or an experience or a physical place or even people that is that really puts ourselves against our own deeper responsibilities as humanity. So let me give you an example that is very concrete, and something that we're experiencing right now as a community in San Antonio, where in our ancestral traditions, as many other indigenous people, there is a continuity of relationship with our ancestors that transcends the physical embodiment. We honor our ancestors as an integral part of who we are as a people. And so as bodies have been exhumed at the Alamo, we have a responsibility to ensure that they are, first of all, ideally never exhumed or disturbed, right? Which has been the legacy of, extraction of indigenous native human remains at these sites with impunity, because there's a sense that, they're Indians and they're artifacts. They're not people, and that's a moral decision that's made there. But in this circumstance where we're talking about ancestral remains and people being exhumed at the Alamo, the settler colonial state says, you're not a federally recognized tribe, and so therefore we don't have to address you when dealing with your ancestral remains. And the legitimization of the tribal communities based off of the history of the Coahuiltecan people, particularly here in San Antonio, people aren't examining all of the historical framework of why the local indigenous people wouldn't be federally recognized to begin with, because of the Spanish Crown, Texas Republic, and all of these different iterations of this land base under these different flags, to where there was no land to hand over to the federal government in order to become wards of the state and then receive federal recognition. The Coahuiltecan people continue to be on their ancestral homeland and continue to have the inherent right to determine as an indigenous community what happens with the remains of their people. And again, the settler colonial mindset says, these are the rules and this is what we're abiding by. These are the artificial rules, because if they were actually following the law, this wouldn't be an issue. But the mindset that says, we're going to disregard your human dignity and the dignity of your people, because these are the convenient rules that we're going to operate on at this historic site, and continue to disregard what that translates into is a continuation of the disregard and the value of native lives and the original people of these lands. As environmentalists, as people who care about the land and the water and all that which gives us life that way, and people are beginning to do that work of recognizing the native people, indigenous people of the lands where they're at as the original stewards of these places, because we don't own the land, she owns us, right? But that we're all ultimately stewards, but those that have an understanding in the bones of the people who are beneath us are these indigenous communities, right? And so if we're going to talk about doing land acknowledgements, having conversations of honoring indigenous people, then that has to, what correlates with that is being able to put native, indigenous people, original people at the forefront of these conversations, because the sense of duty and responsibility that exists is one that is a moral imperative, right? It's not a resource and economic decision. It is a moral imperative, because these are literally the bones of our people and our ancestors within us, underneath the earth, and in the water that exists within us, right? And so when folks are approaching, saying, well, we know that, indigenous people, we know these things. Okay, so then what? And how do I, as an ally, what's the then what, right? And how does that play out? It's being able to not only uplift the leadership and voices and demands of indigenous people, in that sense of, hold on a second, we're looking at this possibly in a myopic way, and we need to step out a little bit and really hold and hear the voices and the demands of indigenous people, not just in Texas but around the globe, to say, this is enough. You're killing us. This entire system that we're living in is destroying the potential of any quality of life, dignified quality of life around the globe. It's not just under our noses. Things are way worse in a lot of other places than here, and we have the privilege to have these conversations. And so if we're really holding and listening that guidance that says this is enough, then that moral imperative translates into action. And here locally, the way that action looks like, it can be a lot of ways. I have the deepest respect and gratitude for the different community organizations that exist, led by indigenous people, which are putting the rubber where the rubber meets the road there, right? Making action happen. And so all of the people that are watching this, all of those that are going to have conversations behind this, if we're really going to be genuine and authentic in wanting to be allies and accomplices of indigenous people, that means really holding on to what those core demands are. And that means really stepping back, doing this work. This Unlearning White Supremacy series is a scratch of the surface of doing the work and inviting all of us, because whether you're, Latino or African American or South Asian or from anywhere around the world, we have been socialized into a white supremacist settler colonial mindset, because that has been what is centered. That's what we look at the world through, those eyes. And until we're willing to be able to acknowledge what that is and begin to tap at that curtain and figure out where do we pull it back, that's where that work is. And so I invite folks that, they acknowledge that they have a duty. They acknowledge that they have power and personal capacity to be able to do more. Tap at that curtain, pull it back. And then what you'll find is a mirror. And in that mirror, it takes compassion, courage, and willingness to ask tough questions, to be able to continue to do the work. So when you look at the Alamo, you don't think Davy Crockett or all of this, John Wayne mythology of this place. You think of the compassion and grace of those indigenous people that intermarried, that ended up as the demographic bedrock of San Antonio, that built Mission San Antonio de Valero, aka the Alamo, and all of the other missions that were the pueblos that San Antonio grew up around. And that you can acknowledge that place represents a gateway to conservatively 10,000 years of history here. And that we can look at places through a different lens, and that's the work in the mirror, because it is an ongoing onion of stuff that you're peeling back, and it's liberating and empowering, and helps you to calibrate your compass in life on a whole new level. It's messy, dirty work. Highly recommended.
So our continued gratitude and thanks to Karla, the folks at AIT, and all of those working to dismantle colonialism, the settler mindset, white supremacy, to restore relations for all people and all beings. Along those lines, I mean, I know there's a lot happening at the Texas Ledge. I did not want this to slip under the radar for folks. I do urge your support. Go to AIT, go to tapilam.org, and just look for the resources there to call your state representatives and those who are maybe sitting on this tourism committee where the House bill is sitting. At Deceleration, it's been a busy couple of weeks, and we have up, hopefully by now, the Words for Birds 2-day poetry and writing and activism, an event in defense and support and to honor and to celebrate our feathered relatives here in San Antonio, and just invite folks to check that out, and we'll talk to you soon.